Yeah, road to Golgotha.
Yeah, see? Jesus is carrying the cross. So, hello everybody. We are in Düsseldorf and working very hard on this exhibition here. So, we've got some nice photography here. Okay, while I'm still working on building my installation, as you can see, across with a solar panel, but I will show you more later. Then we have some artwork by Jakob Holt. PaleBlueDot, International Positions on the Environment. It's the title of the exhibition, by the way. Yeah, Irakli has still not finished his one, but it looks great already. Yo, there we go with some very graphical art, natural patterns and colors. I like this one the most, it's really wonderful. Okay, so far the room is really great. There's a lot of light, many windows. We'll keep you updated. Alright, and welcome again. We just finished my own installation here entitled Apocalypse Child. What you see, so here's the draft. So what we see here is a cross and a solar panel as savior, and the solar panel and the cross stands on a very large rare earth mine. Yeah, sure. So there's Irakli, who helped me.
Please?
I can check the text immediately, yes.
Ob the spelling is alright.
Sure. So we're finally here at the great opening. There are quite some people, which is great. It's a nice atmosphere. People seem to like it.
Mit Jacke oder ohne Jacke gefällt?
Ohne,
Ohne, ich sag mal.
oder?
Okay.
Wir müssen ihn fragen.
Hallo?
Okay, I'm making another round showing you some of the artworks here. There we have number one, a video installation entitled "The Earth Was Green and the Sky Was Blue." This one is called Whale Fall, I Think I Melt. It's an installation made of wax and flowers. So this one is my very own work. It's entitled Apocalypse Child. And what we see here is an aerial photograph of the Mountain Pass rare earth mine and processing facility in San Bernardino County, California. And resting on that rare earth mine is the cross with solar panel. So, well, you have your own interpretations. Here we have 4 photographs by Eka. Müllordnung, Glückliche Insel, Happy Island, staatliche Grünfläche and harmonische Dystopie. So, and here we have 4 photographs by Jakob Holt, who was quite famous for his American Picture series in the 70s. This one is I Lived. He's commenting each photograph. This one, I lived in these shacks in the slum site Soleil, Haiti, during the Hurricane Gordon in 2000. And here he has a peasant on his burn and slash land in northern Thailand, all leading to quick soil erosion of the former rainforest, 2002 in Thailand. This is the same title, Burn and Slash in Thailand. And here we have burn and slash farming on the steep valleys in Bolivia, where the peasants know they can only grow something for 5 years before the earth has eroded. But we have no choice if we want to survive. 2004. Alright, this epic work is a wall painting by Irakli, and we named it Omnicidal Contamination. He let me choose the title, and I entitled it Omnicidal Contamination. And you can see a very dystopian landscape with a toxic creek and some people with gas masks wandering. Yeah. This series is entitled Everything Happened Suddenly. And back there we have a video installation with commentaries from the deforestation site. And the title is Linger On, video and text loop installation. And this installation out of rubber from bicycles is called Mangroves.
sind illegal. Alle Pflanzen sind legal, alle Regierungen sind illegal. Alle Pflanzen sind legal, alle Regierungen sind illegal. Alle Pflanzen sind legal, alle Regierungen sind illegal. Solange der Mensch denkt, dass Tiere nicht fühlen, müssen Tiere fühlen, dass Menschen nicht denken. Solange Menschen denken, dass Tiere nicht fühlen, müssen Tiere fühlen, dass Menschen nicht denken. Die natürliche Welt ist ein lebendiger Organismus. Sie hat Venen, Lungen, ein Verdauungssystem, Haut und Haare. Wenn Mutter Erde stirbt, werden wir alle sterben. Der Mensch. Die Menschheit ist besessen davon, alles Wilde zu domestizieren. Was sich nicht domestizieren lässt, wird ermordet, ausgerottet, getötet. Das gilt für wilde Tiere und wilde Menschen.
In diesem von uns entfachten Sturm.
Für wilde Tiere und wilde Menschen.
Im Großen und Geringen.
Ich habe gelernt, dass man niemals zu klein dafür ist, einen Unterschied zu machen. Denn wer die Welt ändern möchte, der kann sich nicht an die Spielregeln halten. Die Regeln müssen sich ändern. Alles muss sich ändern, und zwar heute.
Der Lehren des Sisyphus.
Wenn Mutter Erde stirbt, sterben wir alle.
Galiläen Sokrates.
Wenn Mutter Erde stirbt, sterben wir
Aus der
alle.
Nationalismus.
Die natürliche Welt ist ein lebendiger Organismus. Sie hat Haut, Haare, Knochen, ein Verdauungssystem, Venen.
Wahre Handlung. In der Gegenwart.
Wenn an vielen kleinen Orten viele kleine Menschen viele kleine Dinge tun, dann wird sich das Angesicht unserer Welt verändern. Wenn an vielen kleinen Orten viele kleine Menschen viele kleine Dinge tun, dann wird sich das Angesicht unserer Welt verändern. Wenn an vielen kleinen Orten viele kleine Menschen viele kleine Dinge tun, dann wird sich etwas in der Welt verändern. Solange der Mensch denkt, dass Tiere nicht fühlen, müssen Tiere fühlen, dass Menschen nicht denken. Es ist der reinste Wahnsinn, alles beim Alten zu lassen und zu denken, dass es besser wird. Der reinste Wahnsinn ist das. Alles beim Alten zu lassen und denken, dass irgendetwas besser wird. Es geht nicht nur darum, dass wir darüber nachdenken, was wir tun, sondern dass auch etwas passiert, wenn wir etwas nicht tun. Und wenn an vielen kleinen Orten viele kleine Menschen viele kleine Dinge tun, dann wird sich etwas verändern. Ich habe gelernt, dass niemand zu klein ist, einen Unterschied zu machen.
Alle Pflanzen sind legal. Alle Regierungen sind illegal.
Sinnlosigkeit der Welt losgehen.
Die ganze Menschheit ist besessen davon, alles Wilde zu domestizieren. Und das, was sich nicht domestizieren lässt, wird ausgerottet, ermordet, getötet. Sowohl wilde Tiere als auch wilde Menschen. Alle Pflanzen sind legal. Alle Regierungen sind legal.
Mit dem Gehirn.
Die größte Sehenswürdigkeit, die es gibt, ist die Welt. Sieh sie dir an! Die größte Sehenswürdigkeit, die es gibt, ist die Welt. Sieh sie dir an.
Was wurde gelernt aus Geschichte?
Das Wort
Krieg.
für Welt ist Wald. Das Wort
Erste Dampfmaschine.
für Welt
18. Jahrhundert.
ist Wald.
Beherrschende
Das Wort
Was
für Welt
haben wir
ist
ausgedeutet und weiter aus?
Wald. Das Wort für Welt ist Wald.
Hello, and welcome to my talk, Apocalypse Child, Why We Need a New Earth-Based Religion. There was a time when our sacred Mother Earth was full of life. The Arabian Peninsula was oak savanna, the Near East, the Mediterranean, and whole Europe was heavily forested. The Atlantic was so full of whales that their breath covered the sea with thick fog. Every large river in the northern hemisphere was full of salmon swimming upriver to spawn and die, feeding wolves, bears, humans, and the whole forest ecosystem with rich marine protein and minerals. The water was so clean that you could drink from every river, creek, or lake. Wolves were the most common predators of the northern hemisphere. Mother Earth is a living organism. She has bones, lungs, veins, a digestive system, skin and hair. She gave life to a nearly infinite diversity of life forms she created in her own image. We are alive because she created us. If our great mother dies, we all die. The wolves, bears, and the salmon are all gone. The rivers so polluted that drinking from them is a hazard to your health. whales are critically endangered, and the oceans are choking from the waste of our civilization. The term apocalypse stems from the Greek apokalypsis, meaning revelation. It is the revelation that our culture, civilization, later industrial civilization, is killing the planet. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Indeed we did, with fire, sword and gun, colonizing everything and destroying everything that couldn't be colonized. With the Enlightenment, omnipotent God metamorphosed into omnipotent progress. Man became God himself by creating the miracles of industrial technology. Technocracy is the new religion and will finish the mission God gave us by destroying every living being on the planet and replacing it with human technology. We need a new life-centered religion if we want the planet to survive. My name is Boris Wu, and I am a radical environmental and social rights activist and a permaculture farmer. And I want to explain the term radical because it doesn't mean that I am an extremist of any sort. At least I don't think I am. Radical comes from the Latin word radix, which is the root. So radicals are those who always want to go to the root of things, who want to really have a very deep analysis and find the truth. So I come from a land base called Odenwald, Odin's forest, and I live next to a river which was home to salmon until about 150 years ago. The chemical industry and dams murdered them. And the answer for the question why we need a new earth-based religion is this toad. Because toads have been a symbol of wisdom in medieval European mythology. So nowadays, we don't kill them deliberately. We don't even see them. We just drive over them and accidentally kill them, as we just drive over and accidentally kill all the ancient knowledge and wisdom. Since all knowledge and all wisdom comes from nature, there's no other way. Back in 2010, I could still see large runs of migrating toads crossing the roads in spring to reach the ponds they need to mate and lay their eggs. The last 10 years, I've witnessed them becoming fewer and fewer and smaller because of habitat loss, cars, and the extinction of insects also, which are their food source. That is what our culture is doing. During my lifetime, the last 40 years, the world has lost about 60% of wildlife. 60%. And that is why I am an apocalypse child. Do you believe that wolves have a right to live? Do you believe that wolves, lynx, bears, American bison, European bison, golden eagles, white-tailed eagles, wood grouses, hazel grouses, adders, grass snakes, common toads, salamanders, stag beetles, or grasshoppers have a right to live? Glaubt ihr, dass Wölfe, Luchse, Bären, Wisente, amerikanische Bisons, Steinadler, Seeadler, Auerhühner, Haselhühner, Kreuzottern, Ringelnattern, Erdkröten, Salamander, Hirschkäfer oder Grashüpfer ein Recht auf Leben haben? Because all of these unique creatures once inhabited our land in large numbers until our culture began to murder them shamelessly. Because this culture is omnicidal. And this talk is an attempt to explain why this is and what we can do about it. But let me put this into some context here. We are inside a large auto house, a large car dealership, a very large industrial complex that was used to sell cars. And now it's an industrial ruin. And what I find fascinating is that it is now inhabited by about 140 artists who have their studios here. And you can see in some spots that the roof is damaged and there's water leaking in. And what some of the artists did is just putting a plant where the water is dropping. So I love this. This is really a piece of art in my view, to grow plants in industrial ruins. It reminds me of a quote by John Firelame Deer: "Artists are the Indians of the white world." And I want to tell all you people, please plant plants, because plants will save the planet, really. Permaculture activist Jeff Lawton said, "We can solve all the world's problems in a garden." And while this is certainly grossly oversimplified, it's also true on another level. I believe that if we will survive, the habitats we will survive in are gardens. If we will survive in small-scale horticultural structures and societies. Another very important context here is that we are in Düsseldorf, the home of Joseph Beuys, one of the world's most influential conceptual artists. And I would like to tell you how he influenced me. He certainly extended the definition of art when he said everyone is an artist. Jeder Mensch ist ein Künstler. And I love his concept of art as a social sculpture which could potentially reshape society and politics. Joseph Beuys said that the most important discussion is epistemological in character. Die wichtigste Diskussion ist erkenntnistheoretischer Natur. Epistemology is the philosophy about how we know things, how we gain our knowledge, how do we explain things. And again, I would say all wisdom comes from nature. And since we are apart from nature, our epistemology is also problematic, which we will see. Joseph Beuys saw his role of an artist as a teacher or even a shaman who could guide society into a new direction. Again, artists are the Indians of the white world. Beuys said, "I don't use shamanism to refer to death, but vice versa. Through shamanism, I refer to the fatal character of the times we live in. But at the same time, I also point out that the fatal character of the present can be overcome in the future. And that is exactly why I am here today." And I think these are very wise words, because what is shamanism? This is grossly oversimplified, but it is basically listening and connecting to nature. And the truth is that you cannot have shamanism without connecting to nature, where all the wisdom comes from. In his 1974 performance, I Like America and America Likes Me, Joseph Beuys visited the United States without actually setting a foot on them. He was brought by an ambulance from the airport to the site of the performance, where he shared his room with a wild coyote for 3 days. He said that he wanted to isolate himself, insulate himself, see nothing of America other than a coyote. Yeah, well, that's also a statement. If the only American you want to see is a wild coyote. Beuys was motivated by a belief in the power of universal human creativity, and he was confident about the potential for art to bring about revolutionary change. For the Documenta in Kassel in 1982, his art project was the collective planting of 7,000 oak trees in the city of Kassel. This project exemplified the idea that a social sculpture was defined as interdisciplinary and participatory. Beuys wanted to effect environmental and social change through this project. He wanted to widen the definition of art to provide evidence that art is now the only evolutionary, revolutionary power. Only art is capable of dismantling the repressive effects of a senile social system that continues to totter along the death line. To dismantle in order to build a social organism as a work of art. Every human being is an artist who, from his state of freedom, the position of freedom that he experiences at first hand, learns to determine the other positions of the total artwork of the future social order. I agree with Beuys that art must be political. At the very least, art has to be a mirror to society and an attempt to show the radical and sometimes ugly truth. At the very best, art can really bring social and political change towards more freedom and more justice, and it can and should be a revolutionary force. So here is my own feeble attempt. The title of my installation is Apocalypse Child. So Jesus was Apocalypse Child, and that he represented the hope for a savior from brutal colonial rule of the Romans. His death on the cross became a powerful religious symbol. We are now in a similar situation because we are threatened by very apocalyptic events like climate change, the birth of the oceans, extinction crisis, and many more. Nowadays our religion is technocracy and our savior is technology. Renewables like solar and wind in particular. But technology comes with a price and it will not save us. In fact, industrial technology is being built from the dead body of our Mother Earth, as I'm trying to show with the picture of a rare earth mine on which the cross is resting. Back to the question, do you believe wolves, bears, lynx and so on have a right to live? And if you believe that, do you ask yourself why they don't live here anymore? Do you ask yourself why our culture exterminates all of our fellow creatures, large and small, from grizzly bears, Siberian tigers and elephants down to amphibians and insects? I've been asking this question a lot, and I think it has to do with culture and the cultural relation we have to the land we live on. I distinguish 5 human cultures according to the way they get their food. So, hunter-gatherers. There have been many hunter-gatherers. It has been the most common way of life. But now they are very few because our culture, civilization, exterminated most of them. The same goes for horticulturalists. Many Native American nations relied on corn, beans, squash, potatoes, and so on as their main food source. So they did horticulture, small-scale gardening, and they may have hunted or fished additionally. Our culture stole the food plants they cultivated for thousands of years and committed a genocide on the native nations and tribes. Pastoralists are animal herders who rely on larger herds of ruminants as their main food source, like the Maasai of Kenya and Tanzania who rely on cattle as their main food source, or the Sami of Finland with their reindeer herding. We see that it all boils down to the distinction between indigenous and civilized. Indigenous peoples have been continuously attacked and destroyed by civilizations from about 10,000 years ago up to this day. Indigenous are, in this definition, those who really live sustainable. They live in ways that don't harm the land, and they live in ways they can continue forever. Civilizations, on the other hand, always collapse. They are either destroyed or conquered and assimilated by a larger civilization, or they collapse because they overuse their land base, among other factors like increasing corruption, decadence, and so on, as we can see today. So agriculture is really the basis of civilization and the way we relate to the land base and get our food. So we can see that different forms of agriculture evolved in different parts of the world, but I want to focus here on grain agriculture based on wheat and cattle mostly, which is shown here in what they call Southwest Asia, which is the Fertile Crescent. So this is where this form of agriculture invented or evolved. And we see that it's expanding, that is the most expanding from all of these forms. And the point here is that agricultural civilization is endlessly expanding. Here we can see how it expanded from the Fertile Crescent through Europe. And later, from the year 1492, we would have to add the American continent to the expansion. So expanding in the year 1492 to the American continent and starting the largest genocide in human history. A genocide done by civilized agriculturalists to hunter-gatherers and horticulturalists. Europeans destroyed more than 500 different nations, cultures, languages, and worldviews that will never come back. Here we see monuments built for conquistadors, and I think that building monuments for mass murderers is art being misused as propaganda, and it's also a sign of a deeply insane and sick culture. And we have to say that the genocide is actually an omnicide, because the colonizers murdered both native humans and native animals in the millions. They shamelessly murdered the world's largest herds of ruminants, an estimated number of 60 million American bison. They didn't use the meat, they basically shot them for fun and to make space for the growing cattle industry. But they used the strong leather to make transmission belts for the use on steam engines, for the ever-growing industry of sawmills, ships, trains, and so on. So there we see that nature, in this case the skin of large bison, is literally being used up to build more and more machines. So nature is literally being turned into machines. You can make the same case for oil from whales, which fueled industrialism and capitalism for about 300 years during the great era of whale catching, until they were replaced by fossil oil. The era of European expansion and colonialism was also an era of increasing devastation of the natural world. I've asked myself the question, why are we doing all of this? And we are doing all of this because unquestioned beliefs are the real authorities of any culture. And a central unquestioned belief of this culture is that humans are superior to and separate from everyone else. Human supremacism is part of the foundation of much of this culture's religion, science, economics, philosophy, art, epistemology, and so on. So here we have the word epistemology again, from which Boyce said that the most important discussion is epistemological in character. And we see that it is problematic to build a culture's epistemology on an ideology like human supremacism. In his book Ishmael, the writer Daniel Quinn points out that every culture has a guiding story, that culture is basically enacting a story. So every culture has a guiding story, and if your story is that the land you live on and the river you live nearby and you catch salmon from to eat, and the salmon themselves, that all of these are sacred to you, you will not destroy them. It would be stupid because you would destroy your food source. But if your story is, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground, well then you will act another way. And that is why we need a new earth-based religion. By the way, the Hebrew word kabash can also mean to take possession of as cultivated land. And my point here is that the Bible is a manifesto of an agricultural, expansive civilization. And the end of our story is the apocalypse. The greatest extinction of animal species in 65 million years. It's climate change. It's the toxification of rivers, lakes, and oceans. It's the destruction of the world. It's the time we live in. Apocalypse children. The interesting thing is that there are many apocalyptic movies like Mad Max, but there are no movies with a positive future vision for our culture. Somehow, everybody seems to know that it is destructive, and nobody really cares anymore. Before our generations watched Mad Max, many previous generations have been seeing large paintings with apocalyptic visions frequently when going to church. So it seems like our culture is really conditioned for the apocalypse to come, almost waiting for it with a pervert appetite for total destruction. As we can see here, the early Jewish apocalypticism was the result of colonialism and foreign rule by the Greek kings Antiochus III and IV, who called himself Epiphanes, the appeared one, the appeared God. So Wikipedia puts it in very politically correct terms here when they write that the early Jewish apocalypticism in the 3rd and 2nd century BC probably had its indirect cause in the Hellenization efforts of Antiochus III and Antiochus IV. There are interesting parallels in other areas affected by Hellenization, such as Egypt and Mesopotamia. And when they say Hellenization, what would they mean? Well, they mean colonialism and conquest and brutal foreign rule and deeply traumatic experiences. The apocalyptic visions from the Bible have been interpreted as mystified, traumatic experiences of brutal colonialism. Daniel was speaking of 4 terrible beasts, and the 4th beast is Antiochus IV, who has iron teeth, which means that the armies were equipped with iron weapons, because this falls into the time of the early Iron Age. So apocalypses are visions of total despair. They arise on the trail of destruction that empires bring, where salvation for the conquered can only be imagined by the total destruction and recreation of the cosmos. Apocalyptic thinking does not break with the principle of power, but multiplies it. In the end, there is no liberation, but a new kingdom, the kingdom of the highest, whom all powers serve and obey. So the Old Testament image of God is an exaggeration of godlike kings like Antiochus, who called himself the appeared God. In more recent times, God was replaced by science as almighty explanatory model, and by technology as new promise for a continuously better life in the future. European nations started to colonize the rest of the world with the mission to spread the light of civilization, which of course is a rationalization of colonialism. Thinkers like Galileo, Newton, Descartes, Hobbes, among others, were pioneers of the modern natural sciences, and they reshaped the world by designing mechanistic worldviews. Bodies of humans and animals, as well as the whole society, increasingly follow the mechanical laws of a machine. We can see the same worldview today, driven to the extreme with algorithms, artificial intelligence, modern technology for surveillance and control, and transhumanism. Martin Luther and Johannes Calvin linked the apocalyptic tradition to the early capitalist ideology by inventing the work ethic. Among the chosen ones are now those who gain prosperity through hard work. That's the basis for the American dream, where everyone can make it if they work hard enough, and God loves you for working hard and becoming rich. That's why Rockefeller could say, God gave me my money. The point here is that authoritarian religion, capitalist ideology, and technocracy are not opposites, but part of a continuing ideology. Again, why are we doing all of this? We are doing all of this because we believe that life in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. A variety of apocalyptic thinking by Thomas Hobbes. Indeed, the development of agriculture and civilization is seen as liberation from a primitive state of being. The myth of progress is depicted here in another piece of art used as propaganda by John Gust. Agricultural civilization understands itself as the highest form of existence, the highest state of inevitable progress. This ideology has been used as justification for ruthless expansion, brutal colonialism, and genocide. Manifest destiny was another name for this ideology, depicted here with the symbolic figure of Columbia pulling a telegraph wire and holding a textbook, driving away wild animals and Indians. We enter the 20th century remembering that central to apocalyptic thinking is the complete destruction of the old and the creation of a new, better state. The belief in the fundamental transformation of the world through technology is the underlying ideology of our society during the last century. Nature, which is perceived as raw, brutal, and imperfect, as by Thomas Hobbes, is to be replaced by a better system created by man. So this kind of social conditioning with apocalyptic movies as modern forms of large apocalyptic paintings in churches is one of the reasons, I believe, that people in Western societies hardly resist to the destruction of the planet. Because the destruction of the world is part of the story our culture is enacting. What we have to understand about civilizations on a physical level is that they run on energy. They continuously search for and exploit new resources of energy, and that energy can be a new population to conquer and enslave, or a new crop like sugarcane or corn to exploit, or even fossil fuels, which really fueled the rapid technological escalation that we have seen during the last century. They also fueled 2 world wars. And I want to introduce a man named Fritz Haber, who was a particularly important man whose inventions shaped our recent history. Fritz Haber developed the process of ammonia synthesis in 1909. Ammonium nitrate is the basic material for explosives. He volunteered at the outbreak of World War I in 1914 and worked in the German War Ministry on the synthesis of war chemicals. His research made him the father of the gas war. He developed chemical weapons that were successfully used in the First World War, like the mustard gas. After World War I, the industrial manufacturing of ammonium nitrate became a common standard to produce ammunition and explosives. And this common standard was being used in World War II by all participants. After World War II, many countries were sitting on large stocks of ammonium nitrate, which is also an excellent source of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. Pesticides are based on toxic gases developed for war, so the chemical fertilizer and pesticide industry was created as a result of political efforts to convert the war machine for peaceful purposes. That is why Vandana Shiva is saying we are still eating the leftovers of World War II. So Fritz Haber's inventions indeed broke the planetary boundaries by artificially producing more nitrogen than there would be naturally. This was the birth of modern industrial agriculture. Additionally, there have been other innovations in agriculture like hybrid breeds that is higher yielding but infertile varieties, which was the business of Monsanto and Bayer. Factory farming, which leads to higher production of low quality meat, and the use of massive and heavy machinery in general. The invention of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer and all the other innovations led to an explosion of human population that the planet has never seen before. All of these industrial processes are very intense in their use of fossil oil, and as we can see in the graph, the population growth and the amount of oil extracted are correlating. So Michael Pollan, in his book The Omnivore's Dilemma, says if As has sometimes been said, the discovery of agriculture represented first fall of man from the state of nature, then the discovery of synthetic fertility is certainly a second precipitous fall. Fixing nitrogen allowed the food chain to turn from the logic of biology and embrace the logic of industry. Instead of eating exclusively from the sun, humanity now began to sip petroleum. So the solar energy that has been stored for millions and millions of years in fossil coal and oil allowed the economic system to break through the planetary limits, of course only temporarily. This will not last because a system that is completely dependent on non-renewable resources can only last until the resources are being used up. Richard Manning is summing up the reasons why our political systems are obviously incapable of facing the problems and dealing with them. Because culture is being created through the way we get our food, which is also the way we relate to our land base. With our culture being a creation of agriculture, most of us have no longer a relation to the land we live on. So it's hard for me to understand how a population can completely give up the control over their food source. Few of us think about that this is the first time in human history that really we are completely dependent on industrial agriculture and supermarket system, and only very, very few of us still know how to grow food or to produce food. After World War II, we still had a system of small-scale farms and the knowledge how to produce our own food, which, along with the rations from our American friends, saved the German population from starvation. Now we gave up all of our food sovereignty, which makes us completely dependent on industrial agriculture and supermarkets. Victory gardens, also called war gardens or food gardens for defense, were planted by private people on their properties and also in public parks in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Canada, Australia and Germany during both of the world wars. Because in wartime, governments encouraged people to plant victory gardens not only to supplement their own rations, but also to boost morale. They were used to reduce pressure on the public food supply. So now we have a war going on again in Europe, and this war is already having serious effects on global food supply. And I tell you, this is just the beginning. So where are the victory gardens now? I am not the first one to discover that our way of life is unsustainable and indeed racing towards catastrophe. A group named the Club of Rome released their famous report, The Limits of Growth, exactly 50 years ago in 1972. In this report, they were stating that the obvious, which is that you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet, and our civilization is racing towards collapse. They wrote that if the present growth trends in world population, industrialization, pollution, food production and resource depletion continue unchanged, the limits of growth on this planet will be reached sometime in the next 100 years. That was 50 years ago. They continue, the most probable result will be a rather sudden and uncontrollable decline in both population and industrial capacity, causing overshoot and collapse, with a tipping point around 2020 to 2030. So here we are, apocalypse children. The same people who did the Limits of Growth report did a 30 years update in 2000, which confirmed the original analysis, and another evaluation by University of Melbourne scholar Graham Turner came to the conclusion that resource depletion overpopulation, economic decline, industrial slowdown, and environmental collapse were following almost exactly the lines of the 1972 forecast and leading straight to overshoot and collapse in 2020 to 2030. So here we are, children of the apocalypse. I know that after I made it pretty clear that we stand neck deep in our own shit, people want to hear some solutions. But there are no easy and simple solutions for cultural insanity that has been going on for about 10,000 years. It's not like swiping right or left on your smartphone. Saving the world and saving ourselves will require fundamental cultural change on all layers of society. But before I come up with some real solutions, I want to dismantle some false hopes or bright green lies, which is also the point of my installation. The graph clearly shows that renewables will never be able to replace fossil oil, coal and gas. The production of wind, solar and hydro facilities is totally dependent on fossil fuels. We will run out of energy soon. This is, from the perspective of the planet, a very good thing, because the collapse of our civilization is actually the only thing that can save the planet. So here we go with some real solutions. The first real solution then is to lay down our denial and face reality full on. This is hard, but it has to be done if we want to make any change. Individually and culturally, we have to switch our loyalty away from industrial civilization and the capitalist industrial regime and any other industrial extractive regime for that matter, like China, and towards the living planet. Our loyalty has to be with the living planet, because our civilization is a cancer, and we are all born into this culture, so we are cells of this cancer. But we have to become allies with the natural world, so we have to turn into antibodies and help defeat the cancer and help to heal the body of Mother Earth. The rest of what we do, what we should do, is pretty technical and straightforward. First, we need to stop the ongoing destruction being caused by so-called green energy projects, as well as by oil and gas extraction, by coal mining and ore mining, by urban sprawl, by industrial agriculture, and by all the other million assaults on the planet that are perpetrated by industrial civilization. Second, we need to help the land to heal. The coming era has to be an era of ecological restoration if we want to have any future at all. And this era has to start now. Some more concrete solutions. Foremost is the understanding that perpetual growth is incompatible with life on a finite planet. Economic growth must stop, and economies must begin to contract. We need to understand and acknowledge that if we don't begin this contraction voluntarily, it will take place against our will, and it will cause untold misery. It is common sense that we have to reduce carbon emissions to zero as soon as possible. Otherwise, we might just all die of heat or starvation due to crop failure quite soon. Another thing is that the Americans spend more than 700 billion per year on their gigantic military apparatus. That is more than 2 billion per day, 83 million per hour, or 1.4 million per minute. The US military is also the world's largest single polluter in the world, burning more than 270,000 barrels of oil per day. So to say it bluntly, if we want to stop global warming, There is no way of doing that without stopping the US military. And that is what the promoters of renewable energy will never tell you. They will tell you instead that the military must switch to renewables, which is insanity. As far as I'm concerned, if they need to, they can fight with sticks or bows and arrows, but they have to stop burning fossil fuels. I would recommend to turn the whole military worldwide into highly trained professional ecological restoration and permaculture gardening units. We also need to stop government subsidies for destructive activities like mining, industrial fishing, logging, and so on. Subsidies must instead go to those people or groups who work on ecological restoration. Industrial production of cheap consumer goods, which is basically waste, has to stop. All destructive industrial activities have to stop. And I wish I could tell you about non-destructive industrial activities, but I don't know any. All farmers, no matter large or small scale, must farm in ways that produce healthy topsoil. Topsoil is the basis of terrestrial life, and we already lost most of it and replaced it with chemical fertilizers. Chemical fertilizers are already getting scarce because of the war and the energy crisis, so we have to hurry up. All activities that destroy topsoil, aquifers, rivers, forests, or any part of the natural world must be strictly prohibited. Dams and hydroelectric plants on rivers must be removed to let the rivers once again run free and fish populations to recover. So I think you may slowly get the point of what I mean by real solutions. At the end, I want to go back to agriculture, which is really the cradle of civilization. So really the start of all of this mess. And that has to change back to Victory Gardens. I want to end this talk by briefly introducing Bill Mollison and his concept of permaculture. So Bill was born in 1928 on the island of Tasmania, and he was stunned by the destruction that industrial agriculture brought about in his homeland, the relatively undisturbed island of Tasmania. Tasmania was at that time probably the last undisturbed island or part of the world. So the last one where there was no agriculture. So Bill spent his life searching for solutions by returning into the wilderness and studying the patterns of nature, and also studying the cultures of indigenous peoples. He developed an approach he named permaculture. So much of permaculture is simply an approach to rediscover indigenous ways to relate to the land base. And the three ethical principles that Bill Mollison coined, and they are really the natural guiding principles of any healthy, truly sustainable society and culture. Yes, I think we can and should learn from indigenous examples, particularly from horticultural societies, because this is the way we would live if we would change, because we cannot live as hunter-gatherers anymore, even if we wanted to. This is also a way where you can really garden with nature and use gardening techniques to recover topsoil, and use many techniques for ecological restoration. And in this wonderful graph by John White from 1585, we can see a Native American village with different cornfields, different stages of growth of corn. Also Jerusalem artichoke fields, sunflower fields, pumpkin fields, people processing harvest or food, and people performing a ritual and dancing. To end with Joseph Beuys, the most important discussion is epistemological in character. Bill Mollison also said, if we lose the forests, we lose our only teachers. We can lose all the universities and we lose nothing. But if we lose the forests, we lose everything. So our epistemology must be based on nature, because all wisdom and all knowledge really comes from nature.
And if you ask me what to do with the cities, well, they will decay because collapse will come, and we should rip off the asphalt and all the concrete and plant gardens and keep chickens everywhere and plant 7,000 oaks like Joseph Beuys did, and many, many more. So, I'm done rambling now. Thank you for listening. So, the party is starting now. DJ set up. After show party.
Hotel